Now we turn to the UFC. And we welcome in Sheehan into TYT Sports here. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Please do check out his podcast at Severe MMA Pod. So Nate Diaz is going to face off against Dustin Poirier at UFC 230. I believe that the winner of this fight will probably want the winner of Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Nonetheless, the entire narrative has been spun now that the 4 divisions that have just been added, the UFC does not have to mandate, but the fighters are certainly pressuring Dana White to do so for a 165-pound catchweight between the two. Do you believe that this could potentially happen in time for UFC 230?
Possibly, if they can't pull anything else off. Ariel Helwani from ESPN reported earlier today that the UFC are looking at making either an interim light heavyweight title fight or just a full light heavyweight title fight between Yoel Romero and Alexander Gustafsson. Obviously, with Daniel Cormier is the light heavyweight and heavyweight champion, so he's planning to fight Brock Lesnar coming up early next year. So, you know, that gives a bit of space there for that fight to be happening. But if that fight doesn't happen, I think it's the most likely outcome. The UFC have been struggling to find the main event for obviously the New York card is going to be a huge card on November 3rd here coming up. Diaz versus Poirier is a fight that's already on that card. Lots of people, including myself, would love to see that 5 rounds instead of 3 rounds. Will they make it for a belt? If they make it 5 rounds, they probably will, because the UFC's MO recently has been to make title fights the main events. And especially when you're going to a huge market like New York and a huge pay-per-view card like that, we can get into after that then whether there's a necessity for a 165-pound belt, whether you need to move around other divisions, and that can all be discussed. But I think there's definitely room for a division, let's say a light welterweight division between welterweight and lightweight, because those are the 2 most packed divisions in the UFC and outside of the UFC. So there's definitely enough talent there to fill that division.
The Association of Boxing Commissions and Combative Sports, the 4 approved weight classes, in case you missed it, 165, 175, 195, and 225 pounds respectively. Focusing on the 2 fighters, Nate Diaz has not fought since 2016. What do you expect in a very tough fight against Poirier?
It's tough to know what you get from Nate. He is one of those guys he's either hot or cold. He can come out and he can be the best fighter in the world. We saw him against Conor McGregor. He beat Conor McGregor. The second fight as well, he had a great fight with Conor McGregor. We all know is one of the best fighters in the world. But then he has other fights back in the day as well where he kind of doesn't show up. He got knocked out by Josh Thompson, a guy you'd probably expect him to beat. 2 years out of the cage for a guy like Nate Diaz, I don't think it'll affect him as much as it will other people. He stays in shape all the time. He does triathlons himself and his brother Nick. They're guys that keep in shape all the time. I think he'll come in there and look good. The only problem then is Dustin Poirier is a really, really good fighter. He's also fought Conor McGregor. He lost him in the first round a couple of years ago, but he's improved an awful lot as well. He's beat Eddie Alvarez in his last fight, beat Justin Gaethje in the fight before, beat Anthony Pettis as well, 2 former UFC champions and former World Series of Fighting champions. So, you know, he's no easy out for anyone, but it is a 50-50 fight. You probably favor Poirier just because he's been active, been winning and beating the best guys in the division for the last year or so, and Nate Diaz has been out, but it's a tough one to call.
Hey Sean, I had a quick question for you. Nate has been very vocal about Conor McGregor, about Dana White and some of the things that he is not happy about in the UFC. With Conor McGregor coming back, obviously it's going to be for a lot of money. In your expert opinion, how is the UFC as a whole, the other fighters, how do they see that? How do they see the relationship between Dana and Conor McGregor? And do they feel like, they're not getting enough piece of the pie themselves?
100%, they definitely do, because Conor McGregor has been paid more than anyone ever in UFC history. Just maybe Brock Lesnar is the only one who's ever come close, maybe Ronda Rousey as well. But the other fighters are not getting paid enough. We know all about that. There's been lots of talk about unionization over the last few years, but none of them have come to fruition. The thing about fighters is they kind of have the mindset that they can't be beaten and that they're eventually going to become a champion and they're eventually going to become really rich. And, they don't want to fight for everyone else. They want to fight for themselves and get there. And that's a big problem. Now there are, and the group is growing of people who want to unionize and make it better for everyone, but it's still a very small group. And all these unions that try to come up are just not working. But you still have that, that kind of underbelly of you could call it hatred, you could call it jealousy, you could call it dislike or whatever for Conor McGregor, because he has found the equation to get to the top and to get to all the money and to become the biggest guy we've ever seen in MMA. So I suppose, in a sport, you're talking about basketball before. If LeBron James does that, there's 100 other guys or more in the league who can come up behind him and they're still rich. So, you can't have that much jealousy towards him. Whereas MMA, there's like 10 people and everyone else is struggling, working other jobs, and when you're in a situation like that, there's going to be a bit of needle towards Conor McGregor.
Now, Sean, quick question. Being that Poirier has the advantage just because, again, he's been more active, some might say, and you can tell me if you think this is more wishful thinking, that the Diaz and McGregor fight can actually be more of a possibility than we all think, and then McGregor takes that title, and then he becomes a 3-weight world champion for the first time in UFC history. How much of that do you think is an actual possibility?
Yeah, 100% possible. If they do bring in the 165-pound belt and Diaz and Poirier fight for it, you might as well stop thinking about it, because that fight's going to happen next. It's going to be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. Even if Conor McGregor loses to Khabib Nurmagomedov, he's going to fight Nate Diaz next. They fought twice before, as I mentioned earlier. Diaz won the first, McGregor won the second, and that fight is going to happen again. It's just a matter of timing, really. There's fights out there for Conor McGregor, big money fights. Even if they don't create the 165-pound division, Nate Diaz could be the next opponent for Conor McGregor, whether he wins or loses against Khabib Nurmagomedov coming up here in 2 weeks' time. Especially if he wins. I think if Diaz beats Poirier and McGregor beats Nurmagomedov, then that'll probably be for the 155-pound title. If the 165-pound division is created, then it'll probably be for that. So there's a bit of a roundabout there, but the end result will be McGregor versus Diaz. That's probably going to happen in the next year or so.
Alrighty, Sean Sheehan joining us here on TYT Sports. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
You know what's my favorite song? You could ring my bell. So do it, why don't you? Ring the damn bell and download the TYT app. Available on Android and iOS.